women and men have roles. Men can be nurturers. Women are perceived as the nurturer. But I nurture my wife. I nurture my children. I nurture kids and other people around me. So we have those traits, but we have more instinctive ways at which to go. Provide, protect, preside, procreate, right? The 4 P's of being a man. But how are we executing that? Is that what makes us a man? Not really. I know a lot of males who don't act like men. I know a lot of men who people would not necessarily go, oh, he's masculine, because he's not as physically large or he's not as aggressive as some guys, right? That's not accurate either. I know some very soft-spoken men who are just amazingly masculine men. They have that presence. So that's this great debate we're having at this point of what makes us masculine.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Welcome back to the Derelict Podcast. We are excited to have you here. And we have a very special guest, Brent. Hey, man. How you doing? Welcome.
I'm excited, man. I've been looking forward to this conversation since you and I connected.
Have you? Fantastic. That was a couple months ago. I take that as a huge compliment. That's fantastic. Good. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. So, Brent, for you that don't know, please check out the resources. We'll put some information in there about him and a few of the podcasts that he has. I just learned today that he has a podcast called Read Me a Story, Dad, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's dads basically going through a book and reading a story to kids. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the genesis of that?
It was this weird. Like, I was driving one day with my wife around Christmas time last year. Like, we were just driving through town. I have no idea what happened. I looked at my wife's like, I want to record books for kids.
Oh, wow. Just out of...
It's just like, why? I was like, because somebody needs to. I have a really big, I think men need to lead the way in a lot of areas, but reading to my children out loud has been so valuable for them. And I know the research, I know how valuable it is for kids. And it's like, there are so many kids who just aren't getting books read to them.
Mm-hmm.
And they need to know that there are other good men out there who care about them, total strangers as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I mean, I know even if I look at how often I read to my first child versus my second versus my third, it definitely kind of did this thing. And I've definitely felt bad about that with my youngest. Like, she's not getting the same experience that like my first kid did. And I totally understand too, like if you're watching this and you're like, yeah, I get it, but I work a really long job and then I come home and I'm exhausted. It's 9 o'clock at night and I don't want to read to them. I get that. But I also get how connecting it can be. It can be incredibly connecting. And, I'll tell you a cool story that happened with me the other day. So I bought all 3 of my kids like a customizable book, right? Different based on their age and what I thought they'd be interested in, that sort of thing. And the other day I just kind of randomly walked by my girls' share room. I walked by their room and my 9-year-old was reading the book that I got for my 7-year-old to my 7-year-old. It was beautiful. I loved it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Those little ones were just like, yeah, I did something right.
I know, right? Because we could spend all day talking about, we talk about failures a lot on this podcast. We could spend all day talking about failing as dads, right? At least I could.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
So on that note, Brent also hosts the Fallible Man podcast, correct? So
Yes,
tell
sir.
me, I'm really just interested, and this is going to get into what we're going to talk about today, talking about just fallibility and men and everything else, but maybe just help me with the name. Where'd the name come from? Why Fallible Man?
So, like, when I started feeling the nudge to do this, right? I don't like know-it-all pricks, right? Nobody likes those guys.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I thought, okay, well, it's safe to say none of the men I know personally like those kind of people. And so when I started playing with this in my head, it's like, I want people to know upfront that I'm not trying to say I have all the answers or that I'm perfect or that I've got it all figured out. So I wanted to just, from the get-go, the first time you interact with what I'm doing is, oh, this is a guy who's doesn't have it all figured out, right? I don't want to front. Transparency and being real is very important to me. And so, I'm a guy who I hit a point in my life. It's like, man, there's so much I need to work on, so much I need to go in. And so I wanted to make sure it was really clear. I'm a guy on a journey and I'm learning every day. I learn as much, if not more, from my guest on my show as my audience does.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm constantly tuning things up. And so I wanted to just lead with that aspect of, I'm on a journey. I'm just inviting people to go with me.
I love that. And I think, obviously that's why we connected so well. Well, we connected about you coming on because I have a very similar heart and desire for the people that are listening or watching this podcast right now. I think too is, and maybe we'll get into this in a moment, but we live in a culture where it's not that it's not difficult for women to be open and authentic and honest and say that they're going to therapy and all those sort of things, but it just seems more socially acceptable for the most part, for women to do that. And maybe you have a different experience. So I'm not trying to say this is an all or nothing, but in general, when I talk to a lot of guys, they still want the same stuff. They want the connection and the honesty, the authenticity to talk about their failures, right? To talk about how they're fallible or derelict, if you will, so to speak, right?
Derelict. I was enjoying that.
Yeah, they'll talk about, they want to talk about that, but they don't know how, or they don't feel like they can, or, I have all these other things in the air, and I don't know if I can do this. And what it made me think about when I heard the title of your podcast, we had a little bit of a conversation, is I think that there's this sense that if you are a real man, whatever that is, somebody needs to make a What is a Man movie, just like the What is a Woman movie, if you've seen that one. Somebody needs to make a What is a Man movie, because I think that's an interesting conversation right now. But that being said, I think that a lot of people think that in order to be a real man, you can't really show your fallibility, or you can't really be fallible. So I guess my question for you is, how do you see, or how can you be fallible and also a real man?
I'll see, I was really, because we talked a little bit before this, right? And that was one of the things I was really, I can go off all day, so I'll try and, tune this down a little bit.
But yeah.
I think that comes from a misconstrued idea. I spend a lot of time on men's forums. I'm pretty sure you do too. And I just, sometimes I read things that are just heartbreaking to me, because it's like, I listened to, or I read a post by, he was Gen Z, he identified as Gen Z. And he said, we're having to rebuild masculinity from the ground up because you guys destroyed your old masculinity, and we're floundering, and you guys are trying to tell us to do this, but we're having to build it from the ground up because real masculinity died with your generations. And that's just like, it hit me really hard, because this is a question I wrestle with all the time, but it comes from a misconstrued place of what people think masculinity really is. And so, contrary to a lot of people in our circles, masculinity for men, in my opinion, starts with humility, which is not a really popular opinion. Guys don't like that word all the time. And so it's a hard place to come from, but I think it's really kind of the seat of masculinity. And let me give you an example, because a show recently actually captured this perfectly. I don't think they were trying to, based on the show, but the scene captured it perfectly. So I don't know if you're a fan. I like the Witcher series.
Okay.
And in the 4th episode, there's this scene, right? So I don't know how much you know about the Witcher. If you guys listening don't know.
Oh, yeah, only a little bit. Why don't you tell us?
Basically a hybrid demon hunter. He was bred from humans and witches to hunt monsters. That's what they do. That's what Witchers do, right? So he's at this royal feast. He's accompanying somebody he knows to this royal feast, and he's really unhappy there. Well, the queen is kind of a warrior queen there, and she calls him out. She sees him standing over there. She's like, oh, we have a legend amongst our midst. Why don't you tell us about the slaying of the elves on the edge of the world? And he says, I wrote this down so I wouldn't screw it up. There was no slaying. I had my ass kicked by a ragged band of elves. At least when Philithanril, who is the leader, when his blade touched my throat, I didn't shit myself. And that's all I can hope for you fine lords, is you draw your final breath, a shitless death. But I doubt it. And the queen goes, any man willing to paint himself in the shadow of his failure will make far more interesting conversation this night. But that, to me, like, it captured this moment. And like I said, I doubt the showrunners, that was their intention. But humility comes from a place of strength. This person, this character, there were knights and guards and nobles, and he could have killed all of them. Like, he is just the badass, right? He's unnatural, and he is just, almost unslayable. This guy could have just waded through the blood of the entire crowd. And yet, in the midst of it, he's like, I got my ass kicked, right? Was that him being weak, being that humble in the moment? No. That's a place of, you know what? I can throw out my failings, but I am so strong in who I am, so confident in the man I am, the person I am, that it's okay to put that on display, because there's no one here you're not a threat to me.
You know, I don't know about you, man, but the wisest, most respectable men that I've ever met in my life, the ones that I look up to, whether I fully agree with them or not, but the ones that I look up to and say, I want to live more like that, are some of the humblest guys on the planet.
Right.
And by the way, they're also some of the most successful guys on the planet. So success and humility don't have to be at odds. They are so confident in themselves. I love what you said there. They're so confident in themselves that they're okay. Doesn't matter what. And I don't want to make this sound like, they don't ever have any issues. Of course they do. But in general, as a whole, from my experience of those men, they're okay. No matter what happens. Stuff's going to happen. They're going to grieve it. They're going to have difficult emotions. They're going to have to deal with it. They're going to be humbled. They're going to have to eat humble pie, just like all of us do. But they know in their core that who they are is a beautiful, masculine, awesome person. And they're going to lead with that. That's been my experience, at least.
Well, see, this scene just, it painted it, because everybody can go look this scene up on YouTube right now, right? They can go from the show and look this up to see what we're talking about. But it just painted something that
we'll add the clip. How about this? I'll add the clip in the resources. I'll go find it, or you can send it to me. We'll add it right now. Yeah.
It just painted an image of something that I already had an inkling of. So I moved a lot growing up. And at one point when I was late elementary, so 4th grade, 5th grade, we were at a church in Western Washington. My dad was a preacher. And one of the members there, Jack, was Mr. Army 3 times. He was the head of the Ranger Battalion stationed out of Fort Lewis, Washington. For all our listeners who don't know, there are 3. Fort Lewis is one of them. But, you don't get to that place where you're in command of that.
Total stud. Obviously a total stud. Right.
He was the most unassuming. Like, if you saw him on the street, you never think anything about him. Unassuming, gentle, kind. But my best friend and I were running through the church when we were little, right? And we're running through there, and all of a sudden this hand comes down, and my friend catches it in his chest, and it would look like a cartoon. Like, his hands and feet, we were running so hard, his hands and feet actually flew forward because he just
right.
And this guy was in his upper 50s at this point.
Oh, wow.
My best friend comes to a dead stop in a cartoonish way, and Jack looks down and says, Peter, Brent, if you don't stop running through this building, I'm going to rip your lips off. You've never seen 2 little boys scream and run so fast. We hid until our parents were ready to take us home. Because Jack could, and we knew it. but so much time he was so gentle. And so from a very early age, I got this impression that you didn't have to have this false bravado. You didn't have to be this, rawr kind of individual to be masculine and to be a man, because I saw these men, and I grew up around military guys. I had the pleasure of knowing a lot of special forces guys, and generally they're unassuming and they're just like that, right? It's just this calm. There's a presence about them, but they're not out there thumping their chest. Oh, look at me, I'm so bad. Like, they don't advertise. They don't. It's this gentle strength.
Yeah.
But they're the first ones who will say, I have more to learn. I had one guy, it's like, what am I going to teach you? He's like, I don't know, but you might teach me something I don't know. I'm like,
I love that.
10 times better at this than I am.
Right.
He's like, yeah, but you may have a different way than you do things. I'm like, I have nothing to teach you, really. He's, no, you do. You just don't know it yet,
It was what you were saying earlier too, Brent, how sometimes you feel like you learn more from the guests on your show than maybe even your, audience, or vice versa, right? I feel the exact same way. And I feel like also the wisest men that I know and that I've ever met always feel the same way. They're always the ones that are humble in a way of like, I don't know anything, but not, I don't know anything because I'm an idiot or out of shame or anything else. Just more like, man, there's more I don't know. I'm just willing to learn. I'm willing to be open. And, even in my 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, I'm still willing to learn and be open and challenge my beliefs and everything else. Those are the men who you'll be standing in a room, going back to your other point, they walk in, and it's not like they have to walk in with a trumpet and they have to be 6'5" and 300 pounds and jacked or something, right? They could be 5'2" and 100 pounds, walk in the room, but there's just this presence about them, right?
Oh, yeah.
This calm, confident, like, who's that guy that just walked in the room?
And it's funny because men have a radar for that. So,
yeah.
Like, every man in that room has a spidey sense tingling, whether he realizes it or not. It's whether you tune into it or not. But if you have been around conflict-oriented and combat-oriented people, you're always sizing up your environment and any immediate threats. And so, like, you can be in a busy restaurant. When that guy walks through the door, like, you perk up as like a spidey sense in the cartoons. You're like, there's a disturbance in the force. There's somebody here who,
for sure. And again, like back to what we were saying earlier too, like he could be a 5'2", 100-pound dude. And next to him could be a 6'5", 300 jacked individual who's very egotistical and full of himself and narcissistic and going off about shit and everything else. And that guy, as big of a physical presence as he is, disappears compared to the other guy.
Oh yeah.
If we're paying attention. If we're not feeling insecure and trying to figure out like, well, how can I be 6'5" and 300? You know what I mean? So I guess that brings up another question, Brent. You mentioned several things. You mentioned, as far as true masculinity goes and men that you see, you mentioned what? Humble, gentle, calm, present, right? Maybe you mentioned a couple other ones, but are there any other? So let me maybe preface the reason for this next question before I give the next question.
Okay.
I firmly believe, and we've done several podcasts on it recently, that there's a crisis in masculinity right now. You kind of touched on it earlier, especially in our country, by the way. I travel a decent amount. I at least travel somewhere internationally every single year. And I can tell you from everywhere I've been, and this is not extensive. I haven't been all over the world, but I've been to a lot of countries now. And I can tell you with certainty, of all the countries that I've gone to, here in the United States, we have the biggest crisis of masculinity. Most of the other countries have at least an idea of what masculinity is. Whether you agree with it or not, fine. Maybe you're listening to this and you're like, well, yeah, I hate the Middle Eastern's version of that, or I hate Russia's version of that, or whatever. Fine. But at least they have an idea. Whereas, to your point earlier from that Gen Z guy, we used to have that. It used to be very clear only a couple generations ago, but that's been exploded. So I guess the reason for the question is coming from what I feel like is this crisis of trying to figure out what this even looks like. And within that crisis, I think that there's some voices out there that some people would label toxic or, negative, but guys are listening to them, even if they are, quote, toxic, because they're the only guys speaking out about like, hey, be masculine, right? So I'm curious from your perspective, which I think is going to be a lot healthier than a lot of those people. What other character traits do you see with true masculinity? So we have humble, we have gentle, we have present, we have calm. Are there any other things that pop out for you?
Oh yeah. Like I have a list of 8 that I just are core to what I work with. Discipline's at the top of that list. Masculinity requires discipline. Right? That discipline to, not only like discipline, go to the gym discipline, right? But there's the discipline to how you conduct yourself, to how you interact with other people. I love Jordan Peterson saying about, a good man is a dangerous man who has it under control.
Absolutely. I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking about the strong men, because what I was thinking about is I'm not a martial arts guy, but I know several people that are in martial arts, and the higher it seems like somebody goes in martial arts, the more humble they seem to be with that, and the more dangerous they are. Like I was talking to a gentleman yesterday that has 3 different types of black belts in karate. So he can whip your ass 3 different ways times 1,000, right? And he's one of the most humble, gentle, down-to-earth type of people you have. And there's even, from what I've understand about martial arts, again, I'm not an expert here, but what I even understand, what I've heard before, is that there's even sayings within several martial arts communities that like the more power you have gives you the more responsibility to be calm and not use it, right? It's the guy who's 6'5", 300 pounds and jacked and not using that strength as a negative or to manipulate people or to hurt people. Yeah,
and
that's
you can
huge.
look at it like a gun, the responsibility of a person who carries a gun, right?
Right.
No judgments on people's opinions on that. I have a concealed weapons license, but I've also been a firearms instructor. People who actively carry a firearm, one of the things we used to train people is you go out of your way to avoid a fight because you carry way more responsibility having that on you. You also put yourself in way more peril because if you get into a fight, whether you pull that gun or not, you're now attacking somebody with a deadly weapon just by having it on you.
Right.
Whether you ever draw the gun or not, if you have one and you get into a fight, that's a much more serious charge.
Right. Correct.
The same thing. You get people who are actually trained to be dangerous, have this amazing capability. They're held to a higher standard, not only by themselves, which was where that discipline comes in, but also by society.
Yeah, absolutely. So what else? What back to the question, what other character traits do you see?
I'm a big guy into integrity. I think you should tell the truth till you die. If it costs you your life, you not just tell the truth, but live the truth, right? It's part of the reason why I wanted to come at my show with a place of humility is I never wanted that false pretense. I believe in trying to do the right thing. Now, am I perfect? Thus the fallible man. But no, I think, there are a lot of agencies out there that integrity is part of their motto and they fail horribly at it. But I do have a military background. I grew up around military people, and integrity has always been something growing up, especially as a preacher's kid, that my dad was really, really adamant about and that I've carried into my life. And I think integrity is integral. I said integral. I can always get that
Integral. Wrong. Yeah, you said it good.
But I think, right, it's not just saying the right thing, it's doing the right thing. Because a man with integrity walks into a situation and already has the knowledge. It's like, no, I shouldn't get involved with this. No, that would be wrong for right there. It shapes so much of the decisions you make. And I think those, right. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm old enough. Like I grew up on the hardcore 80s action heroes and watching the old Westerns with my dad that he used to watch. Right. So I grew up on John Wayne and Clint Eastwood and, Lee Marvin and all those guys. And it was like, you do the right thing, even if it kills you.
Yeah, and you know, just one other note on this, because I've heard this from a lot of guys recently as well. So integrity is what you're doing in public and what you're doing in private, which I think probably goes without saying, but important for us to know in a world where we can pretty much get anything on our phone, right? And I'm not even talking about anything specifically. I'm just saying be integrous all around. You know, I had a situation not that long ago where I felt pretty integrous with an action that I was going to take that I could have integrity with, but the way that some guys responded to it was like, well, it only depends on like if your girlfriend's going to care or not. And I was like, no, it doesn't. That's not my moral compass or my integrity, right? What my girlfriend thinks of something. No. Am I acting out of my own integrity? And I think where a lot of guys get into trouble, at least from my experience, is not having integrity with ourselves. Have you noticed that, right? Like sometimes it's easier for us to have integrity with others. Like, sure, I'll be loyal and faithful and have my integrity with you, whether it's a romantic partnership, relationship, friendship, etc. But man, having integrity with myself sometimes is where I feel really fallible. Like, am I actually having integrity with myself? Or am I putting myself as a second-class citizen and everybody else up here? Like, I'll have integrity with everybody else. I don't know if you've ever experienced that or relate to that at all.
Yeah. Well, I think as men, the first place we shortcut is ourselves.
Yeah.
Whether it's in terms of integrity or whether it's in terms of like self-care, right? If my schedule gets busy, my children are not the ones that suffer. My wife is not the first person that suffers is me. I drop my clean eating. I drop my workouts, right?
Yep.
The first thing that goes is my self-care. And so I think that's very common with men, that the first place we drop is anything that affects us and only us, because we're taught from day one that we're second-class citizens.
You know, and I don't want to make this religious, but I'm going to use a religious example. So I grew up in a church. I shouldn't say I grew up. As a young adult, I went to a church that was pastored by a man, and he did most of you said you came from a preacher as well, and he did most of the sermons, and he would often talk about like the order of importance. Mm-hmm. And here was his list. This probably won't surprise you at all. His list was God, spouse, kids, job. And he always went off about the fact that hobbies wasn't even on the list. But what else did you notice isn't on the list?
Self.
Right? So even when I was in the middle of that, it was before I did a lot of work myself, honestly, and I didn't even really notice it, but it was kind of years afterwards. I was like, interesting. So are we ever supposed to take care of ourselves, or are we just supposed to God, spouse, kids, work? If we don't start with ourselves, how do we even take care of the other things? Right?
Right.
Yeah, man, for sure.
I had a mentor who really used to, he came in my life at pretty, like, I was just crushed at the weight of everything. I was just struggling, like riding the struggle bus in a massive way. And he's like, bro, you can't pour out of an empty pitcher. And I was like, okay, I'm done today. Explain that. And so like we spend some time and he still frequently, we don't have an active mentoree. We become friends. And he still frequently is like, yo, I noticed on your Instagram feed, you're not posting any pictures of workouts at all. And I don't care, but usually like I don't post them on my feed. I throw like in my story, I might throw a picture of something, but it's him going, are you getting the workouts in, or do you just cut those out again because you're working, 15 hours a day, 18 hours a day, every day. And I've had another mentor recently call me out on it. And he's like, take an hour, go lift something. Because I love to lift weights. Like I'm one of those truly sick people who I truly love lifting weights. Mm-hmm. Like I have come up with ways just to make my workouts harder, because it's like, I want more challenge, right? More.
Yeah.
My workout partner used to hate me. Nobody likes working out with me. I had one workout partner that grew to love it. Mm. because they saw the change that happened with them.
Mm.
But every time I introduce a new exercise, they're like, "Oh God, no!"
Not another
You
one.
just made this harder, right? When I said, "Oh, I have this new exercise I want to try for shoulders," he's like, "Oh no, that's just translates to harder. That's all that translates to."
So
But it's the first thing I drop off.
Yeah,
is,
for sure.
You know, my workout, which I feel better, you feel better, you know this, right? But that whole, I have to remember all the time, it's like, you can't pour out of an empty pitcher. I can't take care of my kids. I can't take care of my wife if I'm not taking care of me.
It's a really good point. And I think I just want to pause here for a second. If you're listening or watching this right now, here's what I'd like you to think about. And this is where I'm thinking right now too, Brent, is where are you lacking that right now? Where are you slacking on that, right? Like, where are you not taking care of yourself? Is it food? Are you eating to build a strong body? Or are you eating to medicate feelings that are difficult for you? Are you eating just quickly without even thinking about it because you're so focused on something else? Exercise is another good one too. Like, you don't have to lift weights, right? Like, this is not a podcast where you have to have a six pack in order to be on the podcast.
No.
But what kind of exercise are you getting, right? Are you doing what you love? Are you walking? Are you hiking? Are you paddleboarding? Are you skiing? Are you weightlifting? Whatever, right? Something that's getting that adrenaline and those good chemicals moving. Are you sleeping? Are you drinking water? Right? Are you, the other thing too that I find, at least, Brent, is that I know what's good for me. I know what my healthy activities are. I know what makes me happy, healthy, strong, etc. And when I get in a headspace that I don't care for myself, or I want to shame myself, or I don't want to take advantage of it, or whatever that headspace is that's negative, and I start dropping those things, that's also a live breeding ground for addiction, for unhealthy activities, for medicating. However people do that, right? It could be shopping, it could be eating, it could be sex, it could be alcohol, whatever, right? But man, the more I discipline, to use your word from earlier, the more I can discipline myself to act on those healthy traits, the less of that shows up, because I'm just in a good space. So I have a question for you, and I'm sure you still have more to answer as far as character traits and that sort of thing. But of all the ones you said so far, they could also apply to women.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What do you think is, I don't know, is there anything that's unique maybe to men, or that's or more? Yeah. When I say masculine too, I want to specify, mainly speaking of the masculinity in men. So women have masculinity as well. Men have femininity as well, right? We all have masculine and feminine traits, but all the studies show that the majority of men have the majority masculine traits, majority women have majority women traits. So without going into gender and all this conversation right now, let's just assume we're talking about a man with masculine traits. I'm just curious, are there things that you would see that are more unique that maybe are even missing in society right now, that you can speak to the men listening to this?
See, that's where it gets really, really convoluted, right? When back to, I told you I read that post, the concept of masculinity has been broken, right? We'd like to associate stoicism. In fact, if you look at the most iconic movie characters that we think of as masculine, right? You can trace almost their entire character development back to the core practices of stoicism. Every great character that, like, everybody listening, like that guy that jumps to your head, like, man, that's the man. It all goes back to stoicism. That's where that entire character was bred from, because masculinity is the way we choose to operate with fundamental characteristics. It's not the characteristics that make them masculine. It's the characteristics that make us optimal, and then the way we conduct ourselves because of it, right? We can all agree that, well, these days we can't all agree apparently, that, male is a biological trait, right? that really testosterone driven, that's a chemical reaction in your body. You have more of this chemical than that chemical, right? But the men we look at as masculine, it's the way that they carry out and live certain core traits that we actually define as masculine, right? If you look at men being protectors, right? If we think about men protecting women, what is that actually a component of, right? That's integrity. That's your physical health, and that's based on core beliefs. That is, we see this man standing up to protect this woman, but that comes from 3 or 4 core components that are character traits that would be good for a man to have or a woman to have, but it's how that man exercises those traits that makes him more masculine, that we define as masculine, right?
Yeah, and that makes sense to me too, because obviously women can be protectors also, but even just thinking about our long ago ancestors, like, was it the man or was it the woman that was fighting away the lion?
Right.
It was the man. And it doesn't necessarily, again, doesn't mean that man was 6'5", 300. It means that was in his core of like, this is part of my job. I will do this. I will protect at any cost the ones that I love.
Right. And that goes to that core belief of, I am responsible for this said group of people, whether that's a wife, the children, whatever, this just group of my tribe. I am responsible. Why? That comes from a core belief that I have a responsibility. That's not a inherently man trait. Right? And that's why it gets so convoluted, why people can try and play with this argument. It is more about the way we exercise these core components of who we are that testify to I am masculine. I know some amazing female athletes that can outlift most guys, right? They're still feminine. They're still beautiful. They're not masculine, but more physically, they're more capable than some people, right? Do they become masculine or a man because of it? No. God, no. Right? So masculinity becomes a component of, I'm male. Biologically, I have more testosterone flowing through my body, right? I have a penis. I know people will argue that with me till they're blue in the face these days, but right, it's that combined with that nice chemical compound in our body, combined with these core traits and beliefs, right? We all have heard.
And are you saying? I'm just curious now. Are you saying that like being biological male, higher testosterone, etc., and obviously that's all a range with everybody as well. But let's just assume the average male that has a higher testosterone than the average female, etc.
Right.
Are you saying that person actually displays these traits differently than a woman?
Yes.
How so?
I'm going to get in so much trouble on this show.
I can't wait. It's great.
So, right, women and men have roles. Men can be nurturers. Women are perceived as the nurturer, right? But I nurture my wife. I nurture my children. I nurture kids and other people around me. So we have those traits, right? But we have more instinctive ways at which to go. I was saying we've all heard the provide, protect, preside, procreate, right? The 4 P's of being a man. But how are we executing that? Is that what makes us a man? Not really. I know a lot of boys, we'll say boys, right? I know a lot of males who don't act like men.
You're right. Yeah, absolutely.
I know a lot of men who people would not necessarily go, oh, he's masculine.
Right.
Because he's not as physically large or he's not as aggressive as some guys, right? That's not accurate either. I know some very soft-spoken men who are just amazingly masculine men. They have that presence. So that's this great debate we're having at this point is what makes us masculine? Well, it's how we're exercising those, right? So in the caveman, right, where you said, the man's going and fighting off the lion, right? What's the woman's automatic response? Go shelter the children.
Right. Correct. She's protecting as well.
Right? She's protecting, but
Nurturing,
she is
protecting.
getting that by her instinct is to throw herself between the children and the threat, right? Get them as far away as possible. His instinct is to stand his ground because he is the barrier between them. He is what can buy them time to get away. Even if he can't be that thing, he is what will buy them time to get away, even if it costs his life. We have an instinctive way we exercise certain qualities. Women are going to regroup, move away from it, and try and find shelter that way. Men are always going to stand as the barrier to whatever threat is coming at them. Right? It's an instinctive difference on how we execute. We know physically we have a more physical frame, right? We know that men are biologically stronger, even men who are not as big as some weightlifting women, right? We have a biologically stronger frame to stand our ground because we're the ones who are going to go out and face that threat. While the women are going to, that nurturing kicks in and is going to go take the vulnerable people away from it. That's their protection.
And honestly, too, man, I think one of the things that I'm saddened by the most with where I feel like we are as a society is that I think what you just described is actually really beautiful.
Yeah, I think so.
A man living out his masculinity and being the protector and being the guard and being, that's not saying like, oh, women are weak, so men have to do it at all. It's just, no, that's an honor to be able to do that. And it's an honor for the woman to be able to protect and nurture, the kids and everything else in that example. Like, it breaks my heart that we're in a society where somebody's going to get mad at what I just said. Right?
Yeah, right.
Like somebody's going to get mad at that and they're going to get offended by it. Like, but why? I mean, it almost seems like we were designed this way, and it's been like this since the beginning of time. Why can't we have honor and pride and everything else in that? I don't know. Sad to me, at least.
If this is the first time you're getting canceled, welcome to the club, because I got deplatformed.
So speaking of, one thing that you said earlier, I've never done this on a show before, but I'm going to do it right now because I think it applies a lot to what we're talking about. As of this recording, I think it's the most recent of my episodes that came out, maybe one before that. I can't remember which one it was right now. But I got a comment on one of the videos from what looks like probably Gen Z female. Maybe a millennial, but probably Gen Z just based on the photo, right? So I don't really know. But the clip was about like what is true masculinity or what is a true man, that sort of thing. And her comment was, I hope she listens to this podcast so she knows she's getting credit for this comment. Her comment was, real men don't listen to podcasts. And I said, interesting. That's an interesting perspective. Tell me more. And basically what she said, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't remember exactly, but basically what she said is, well, real men are out doing stuff. They're out doing stuff with their hands and they're chopping down trees and all that sort of stuff. And I just thought that was really interesting from a young female perspective, that her perspective is, well, I have what masculinity is in my box and it's not outside of that. And we went back and forth a little bit because I was just trying to encourage her to think a little bit more deeply because kind of my point was, so does that mean a software engineer can't be a man? Does that mean somebody who's building rockets to go to space can't be a real man? And also, by the way, you can listen to podcasts anywhere. So I know plenty of guys that are out chopping down trees listening to podcasts. Right? But I think it was just a really good example of culture telling us, well, it's in this box, and it's not. So I love what you're saying about it in the sense that there's kind of this inborn masculinity that affects these different traits differently.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. And absolutely, it's definitely not how you look, right? Because a lot of people will think, like The Rock, that guy's masculine, right? Because he's huge and he's amazing and everything else, right? And then they'll look at some beautiful star or something and be like, well, she's, Taylor Swift or whoever you like. That was a bad example because I don't even like Taylor Swift. But whatever, like, oh, wow, she's so feminine, that sort of thing. Versus your example of the bodybuilder woman who can lift more than I can, I'm sure. That doesn't mean that she's not feminine, primarily. Even if she's lifting a bunch of weights. Lifting a bunch of weights doesn't even really increase your testosterone much. There's this myth that it does. It really doesn't. It's like this much if you actually do the research.
Yeah, it's a real small amount.
It's very small, and you have to do it a ton in order to even get that very small amount. So that's just bullshit. So it's not like she's so jacked on testosterone that she just acts like a man all the time, right? So I love that because I know for myself, I'll just start with my own fallibility here, is that I can still get stuck in that trap where I see somebody and like, dude, you're a masculine looking man. Like you could be on The Witcher, like just your look and everything else, right? Like you're a fucking stud, obviously. Like, but it's still easier sometimes in my head to look at a guy like you and be like, well, yeah, that guy's a man. And then to look at a guy that might look more feminine, but is still a man and has masculine traits or weaker or smaller or whatever, and be like, but it's just, it has nothing to do with how we look, right? It's inborn.
For your commenter, I actually got stopped. I was coming in from hunting. I was out bow hunting for deer a couple seasons ago, and a park ranger stopped me as I was coming back. And just nothing but just like, hey, how'd it go? You seen anything today? We started talking. He drives all over Washington State. He listens to podcasts the entire time.
Yeah.
We
Right.
started talking about what I actually do, and he like subscribed to my podcast, so he had something to listen to.
Right, exactly.
So, podcasts are everywhere for her opinion. But no, it doesn't. That's the thing, right? I get a lot of, I make a joke at it at this point. So my children pick my hairstyle, the mohawk for all of you listeners.
Nice.
I have a mohawk. This is actually very short right now.
Oh, okay.
I had to shave it off. Usually it's long enough, like I French braid it back, like very Viking-like, and my
Awesome.
beard is longer. But I was doing some interviews that I had to be a little cleaner cut for, so right, I took it down a notch. But I'm a big guy. I'm 6 foot. I've lifted my whole life. I ride motorcycles. I shoot guns. Like I've got a video of me shooting a 50 cal. Right. I do all the very masculine things. I spent years working constructions. I used to do, logging on the side with my father-in-law years ago. None of that makes me masculine.
Amen. Yeah, absolutely, brother.
Right. I know some really jacked dudes who are just little boys.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They work construction. They lift stupid amounts of weight. They have tattoos. Like I have tats.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, you're just a little boy, man. You like, they start talking. You're just like,
yeah, you're a child.
Yeah. Their lack of understanding, their lack of maturity is like, you're going to become a man hopefully someday. But right now you're just really on this kind of lost path.
So that brings up a good question that I think maybe would be good for us to close with, even though I want to talk to you for like 3 more hours, but I don't
We'll
do
part two on the show.
this isn't Joe Rogan. I don't do 4-hour podcasts. I can't do it.
We'll do it. For all you listening, we'll do it part 2 on my show. Okay?
Yeah. Oh yes, please. Let's do that. I'd love to be on your show. That'd be fantastic. So that being said, I guess my main question for the listeners or the viewers right now, especially the men that are listening and viewing, maybe they're confused with not only what their masculine traits are, but also how to increase them or live them more authentically, right? To dive deeper into those masculine traits. And I just think that, again, in our society, men don't get the permission to do that very often. So I want to try to give them permission right now. So if you're a man, we're trying to give you permission, not that you need it, but we're trying to give you permission to live into your masculinity. So what does that look like, do you think? Or what would you encourage, let's say that Gen Zer that you're talking about, in order to live more fully into his masculinity? Is there anything that comes to mind?
First, you have to learn to control your bass boat syndrome, right? Men have a bass boat. I call
What
it,
does that mean?
I don't know that there's a word for it. I call it bass boat syndrome, right? We like shiny, flashy crap.
Oh,
Like
true. Uh-huh.
marketing people know us,
Yeah.
right? We like who paints a boat with a glitter finish? I mean,
Right.
most men don't even like glitter, right?
Right.
We like shiny, flashy, big, loud, and that's what we move to. So we're drawn to the Andrew Tates of the world. Now, I'm not disparaging Andrew Tate. He has some decent things to say, but I also don't agree with him on a lot of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? But he's flashy, right? He's got money, he's got the cars, he's a badass in the ring, and he's got the flash to put behind what he does. And
Right.
so a lot of men are drawn to like the Andrew Tates. You're not going to find real masculinity there. As we said earlier in the show, right? Some of the most masculine men we've ever met are quiet and composed and have that stoic quality to them, whether they're practicing stoics. I love that stoicism is becoming popular in the manosphere, right? We talk about stoicism all the, like actually practicing stoic people who wouldn't necessarily say they're practicing stoicism, right? You're going to find truer masculinity there. So instead of falling for the ooh shiny that is so prevalent on platforms like YouTube, don't look for those loud voices. Look for the voices that actually are saying things that make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face it, most of them aren't ever going to be Andrew Tate, right?
Mm-hmm.
The amount of millionaires in the world goes up every year, but the value of that $1 million has come down a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But right, there are more people who are flashy, but the majority of us are probably not going to be millionaires. If you grit to it, great. Congratulations. I hope you do. I really do.
Right.
I wish everybody all the best, but the majority of us, we can't relate to the Andrew Tates of the world. I don't jump on my private jet and fly to countries where I have other businesses and,
Right.
have $15,000 nights. Maybe you do. I don't, Josh. But
No, I don't. And I it also, so I'm going to add one other thing to your shiny example as well, which is going to sound weird at first, but bear with me. Also apply that to women, please. Everybody listening or watching. And here's what I mean by that. What I mean by that is that, obviously we're kind of visual creatures as well, especially as men. So we love the shiny stuff. We love the car, the boat, the house, the jet, whatever it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also love that in women. There is a part of all of us that wants the like shiny, good-looking woman. And especially now with social media where like everything's AI and everything else anyway, you can get whatever you want if you just want to look it up somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that obviously gets relationships into a lot of trouble. It makes it so there isn't depth. There's not meaning. Maybe Andrew Tate talks all the time about how many women he's fucked, which I just completely is not a masculine thing, by the way, if you're listening or watching. It is not masculine to go out and talk about how many women you've conquered or anything like that. That is not masculine. That is evil, frankly. So, but I still get it because I'm a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
I still see a beautiful woman and notice that she's beautiful. But that doesn't feed my soul.
No.
Doesn't feed my soul at all. Neither does the car or the boat or the jet. It feeds my ego, might feed my narcissism, but it doesn't feed my soul. So that, brilliant. Love that. What else? Was there something else you're going to say besides the shiny?
Yeah. Let's get past the shiny and then start to move into find examples in your life of men who have achieved, but look at the full picture, right? Start looking for men who have achieved the full meal deal. Maybe they have a decent house that's, they're making payments on. Their kids love them. Their wife adores them, right? They're not living the icon life, but they're living a good life. And you go, man, I'd love to have that.
People
right?
respect them. People like him. He gets along with his neighbors. He truly, authentically loves his wife and she loves him. Right? Great connection with the kids. Absolutely, man.
but then get into nature too.
Mm.
Now, this is going to sound weird, right? Not everybody is an outdoorsy person, and you don't have to be. So if you're not a big, like, I hate camping. Why? Mainly it's just a headache. I hate let me rephrase that. I hate camping with other people.
Yeah, it's a lot more difficult. I mean, you have kids, I have kids too. It's a lot more difficult
Right?
taking my kids than just going myself. Yeah.
But you don't have to be a big outdoor person. But men have a natural, like, I cannot explain where it comes from. It's way above my pay grade. Men have a natural connection to the world.
Mm.
And so if you want to start delving into your masculine, put down the cell phone, put down the screens, and go into nature. You don't have to like spend hours or days. You don't have to go be a monk for 3 months or something. I've seen those movements. Go disappear for 90 days and into a cabin. Well, I would love that. But I know a lot of guys who would lose their shit doing that for 90 days. But disconnect, unplug, and go out into actual nature and just start going for walks. You have this inherent sense, this voice inside your head that you may have tuned out at this point, that is going to tell you that breathing fresh air feels good and it clears your mind. That walking and movement in the sunlight and being among the woods clears all this stress, all this frustration, and lets you actually start to hear that voice that guides you into what is actually more real and what is more true, because you know it's imprinted in your DNA. You know it's imprinted in your DNA as a man. All the character traits we've talked about, this inherent masculinity, it's imprinted in your DNA. We just don't hear it anymore because we don't know where to look.
Right.
So
And you know,
out.
if also you're listening to this and you don't live in a place where there's a lot of nature, I happen to live in a place where there's a lot of nature, so it's easy for me. But if you live in a concrete jungle as well, there is a difference between being outside in the concrete jungle and going out to the actual jungle. I mean, I'll tell you what, man, I just got back from Spain a couple weeks ago, and when I was in Barcelona is a bit of a concrete jungle, and I'd been there for several days, and I was like, man, I need a tree. Like, I just need and there's a little park not that far away from where I was staying, and I went there, and I sat on the bench next to some water, and I literally walked up to the bench and automatically felt better. And I just sat on the bench for a while. I didn't do anything. Yeah. I just sat on the bench for a while.
No. Right? Go to the park.
Right.
I thought the first time I ever heard it said, I thought it was like complete BS. Going barefoot in wide open spaces on grass, there is a primal connection. Triggers between your brain and your heart and your soul and the world.
Yeah.
I thought it was completely stupid because I'm not a woo woo kind of guy. I'm the guy who makes fun of woo woo kind of guys.
Right.
But like going to the woods, and be careful because you don't want to step on, some of us have tender feet, right? Yeah. But you know what? Go to where there is grass and trees and not a lot of other stuff, and get barefoot and just be there for a few minutes. Spend 5 minutes there a week, 10 minutes there a week, whatever you can do to start with. But it's amazing when you start to clear out all the other crap and just connect with you in nature, in the world. You start to hear those voices that have been drowned out by everything else, and they'll help you on this journey.
And speaking of woo-woo, because I'm not a woo-woo guy either. However, the older I get, I think the more woo-woo I get, just because the woo-woo that I think is woo-woo, if I could say woo-woo one more time, I'm a very logical, kind of straightforward type of guy. That's why I'm not a very woo-woo guy. However, most of the woo-woo stuff that I've actually tried to implement into my life it works. One of the things as well, which is going to sound very woo-woo to people that aren't woo-woo, when you're out in nature, and you're out with your feet on the grass, or you're hiking through the woods, or wherever it is that you're doing it, what I would also encourage you to do is speak into existence your questions about how to grow into masculinity. And I know that that's going to sound woo-woo, and based on people's opinions of like higher power and God and their gut and where they're hearing things from, like that's all kind of debatable. But what I'll tell you is that a lot of people that I've encouraged to do this and a lot of people that I've heard do this hear things. Like either, I'm not saying like a voice from God or anything, we're not getting weird here, but you feel things, you hear things, but you have to be in a space, like you said, where you can be open to it. You can try to remove the distractions. You got to get rid of the electronics. And then once all that stuff gets out of your brain, it's amazing when you free up a little space and you just kind of get in nature and you just are like, what is it? How do I grow here? How do I grow my masculinity, etc.? You'll feel and hear things. That's just been my experience, at least. So I'd encourage people to do that.
I can de-woo that for you a little bit if you want.
Sure.
Right? So, because like I said, I'm definitely one of those guys who makes fun of woo-woo kind of stuff. And I think as you get older and you try things yourself, you're like, okay, I can see some validity to this or that, right? You got to try things. And I've certainly tried some, but the whole idea of speaking it into existence, I don't believe necessarily in manifestation. However, our brains are conditioned to process information from the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
So just the act of going out into the quiet and saying it out loud
Correct.
actually puts it at the forefront because you hear it with your ears. We hear things with our inner monologue all the time. It doesn't process the same way.
Uh-huh.
So when you speak it out loud and hear your voice saying it in your ears, your brain actually starts to process it differently as information coming in and programming the machine instead of just your thoughts.
Absolutely, brother.
So there's actually, there's not just woo-woo behind that. There's actually science behind that as well. That makes that, because I definitely used to make fun of stuff like that, like people with mantras, and I had a coach who would like, I want you to say this out loud. I was like, screw you.
Yeah, totally. I've had that exact same
I
coach.
love you, bro, but
For sure.
no.
Yeah. I am loved. I am beautiful. I am,
Right?
I am intelligent.
So with a story coach,
Yeah.
great guy, but like we actually did a live story work session on the show.
Okay.
So it's the only show I've ever done like that, but we actually did like a live storywork coaching session so people could hear what storywork was.
Okay.
There was a lot of saying stuff out loud, and me saying some of the stuff out loud and just hearing myself say it, like I could feel the biological difference in the way my body was processing things. Like my heart rate adjusted, my breathing got easier. And I'm like, no, this is just like my head making it work. And he said, yeah, it is. It's your head making it work because you spoke it out loud and your brain processed it. And I was like, I can't believe that worked. But at the same time, it was so cool. So yeah,
it's so true. It's so true. You know, again, for the listeners here, you know, try this out. So here's an example that I'll give you. If you're in a situation where you're stressed or upset or something's not going your way, whatever, try saying, I am calm in your head and see what happens. Because for me, when I say it in my head, I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not. That's the initial next thought, right? Like,
Right.
Well, no, I'm not. I'm stressed out. And then I go into a thing about why I'm stressed out versus I am calm. Like, whew, could already feel it. Try
For all the
something like that.
guys-
Absolutely.
for
And
all the
you
guys
might
going,
seem crazy, man. You could be that person talking to yourself that ends up on Instagram as, you know, somebody else filming, which is great. But just try it. It works. It really does. I love that you brought that up,
weird
Brent.
phenomenon, because I like I said, I thought it was crazy. But for all the guys who are like, okay, you two have gone off the deep end and this is woo woo, think of it this way: if you have to tell yourself you're masculine and that you're manly, or you have to prove it to anybody else, you're not.
Yep, true.
So start with your own conversation that you're having with yourself, right? Get into the nature and have a real conversation with you about who you are and where you want to be. And that's the beginning of the journey.
Love it. Brent, thank you so much for being here. It's been a real honor, man. This has been a really good conversation. I've loved it. And I know a lot of people will get a lot out of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So again, please check the show notes. Brent's podcast links will be there, plus a few other resources we talked about on the show. And as always, if you are listening to this, and what I would encourage you to do is if you thought of a brother at any point during this, not an actual brother, just a brother, a guy that you know, that you think this would mean something to them, send it to them. Like, subscribe, write comments. Please comment. I hope that woman that I was referencing listens to this and comments again on this one. It'd be great. But comment, like, open up. Tell us what your views are on masculinity. I'd love to hear them. We'd love to, have some conversations. In the show notes, I always have my email for the podcast as well. Feel free to email us if you have any questions or you want to go over anything. But again, in order for us to get this community continually growing and get what I really want to see with both of our podcasts, honestly, man, is men that are feeling like they can be humble and vulnerable and authentic and just come as they are. It's so hard for us to do that as men sometimes. So thank you for bringing your true authentic self today, Brent. Thank you for everybody listening and watch. And until next time, we'll see you later, you derelicts.